All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Yoong. I'm Ethan's operating partner. And today, Jono Hey and I will have a fireside chat followed by live discussion on his new book. I have it right here. Big Ideas, Little Pictures, Explaining the World One Sketch at a Time. So, as a quick background, Jono is a product and design leader and creator of the very popular Sketchplanations. It's a site and newsletter, which I highly recommend you subscribe to, where he's been explaining the world one sketch at a time for more than a decade, which Jonah is pretty impressive. I have to say this one quote for the book because it came from Bill Gates and it's really good. This is Bill Gates' words. He says, "It's such a cool book. The range of Jonah's knowledge is astounding, and so is his ability to digest complex ideas into deceptively simple drawings. You'll learn something on every page and be entertained too." And I went through this book in less than 48 hours. It was fast. It was fun. I took some notes, and I also picked six that we're going to go through now. So,
Fantastic.
Jono, are you ready to dive in?
I'm ready. Oh, there's a lot of sketches in the book, so I'm a bit. There's a piece of me is like, how's my recollection gonna be of that one? But I spent a lot of time on all of them, so and they all mean something to me. So hopefully all goes well.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to share my screen, and then we're going to take a look at some of these. Okay, flow, state of flow, focus, and joy. So my first question when you made this picture,
Mm.
Uh, why did you decide to do, let's call it mountain climbing or rock climbing? Why this visual?
Yeah, good, great question. I learned about flow a really long time ago. I mean, it must be 25 years ago nearly, because I was really interested in creativity. And I read the works or some of the works of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who's the guy who founded came up with this idea of flow, and he researched into creativity a lot. And flow itself just really clarified a part of my existence that I really valued. And I was like, and when I'm feeling upset or not motivated, I'm like, oh, am I having these conditions of flow? And the thing about flow, and often when he describes it, is he talks about it as peak experience. And he would listen to descriptions, often of like athletes or sports people, as they're doing the activities that they're doing. And that was where they really talked about, and you saw these essence of activities of flow. And for me, and in a lot of the examples he quoted, climbing was like the prototypical flow activity. And I really like it because it is so clear. So like one of the things about flow is that you have like clear goals, and it says there like an aim in mind. And I just think, you know, in climbing, it's so straightforward. You're at the bottom and you need to get to the top. And am I making progress? Yeah, I'm halfway up, or I'm three-quarters of the way up. Yes, I am. Can I get feedback on that? Is this matched to my challenge? And so I just think flow, like as a one way of illustrating the core concepts. Um, Climbing just is like, it's actually the first example I always go to if I'm somebody's explaining it. So I was like, this is what I got to do.
Same. When someone says state of flow, I immediately picture a tall mountain. Um, do you think flow needs to have an element of fear in it? Fear of failure or fear I can get hurt or something? Because that's what I associate when I think of all these sports or I think of Olympic athletes and the fear of not getting gold medalists. What are your thoughts there?
No, I think I think not. I think often
Mhm.
it might, because you can be in that sort of situation where you're both a little bit scared about what you're doing because it means something to you, and you're not totally sure if you're going to do it. That's part of the thing about having the skills matched with your level of challenge, is you're like, I think I can do this if I do my best, but I might not manage to do it. And also you're excited about it. So I think it makes sense that there are activities like, okay, look, there's a big wave. I'm going to be at my absolute peak if I surf this to my best of my ability. However, I can get into flow when I'm doing a sketch, right? Like I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly what I'm doing here. I know where I'm going to get to. I know I can do this. I'm going to work hard at it. And you get all the things that flow. You lose track of time, and you're just completely focused on the activity and all that stuff. And I've got no danger there at all. I'm not going to drown or fall off a cliff. So I can see how I think you definitely those situations do probably help give you flow in many cases, but I think you can get it really you could get it cooking, for example, I think as well.
I like your nuance there. And the key point is it means something to you. So it's meaningful to you. It doesn't have to necessarily be fear. That's probably a better definition of it. I was going to ask and you brought up the sketching, do you have a process to get you into a state of flow, or does it just happen?
Yeah, a good question. I think sometimes things are just clear. You're like, oh yeah, that's a great concept. I know exactly what to do there. Just going to do that. But most of my experience with work and life and this project is it's kind of the reverse in that sometimes you just have to sit down and start doing it, even if you're
Mhm.
not feeling it. And then as you're doing it, you figure stuff out and then you get into that state. I don't think like yeah, like you can force it to come on. Sometimes you'd be like, I know I have to do this today, so I'm gonna start doing it. And in the process of doing it, things fall into place. But it's not always the case that you can just kick it off, I think. Yeah. So sometimes I just have to like force myself to get on with it. But I think that's true with most like creative work, actually.
I 100% agree to that. Ethan and I talk a lot about that the best cure for anxiety or pressure is simply action. So you just got to do it.
I don't know if you've seen it. I did a sketch on climate anxiety, and that's exactly what that sketch says. Is like you can sit there and feel anxious about all the stuff that's going on, but the best cure for it is to start doing something about it, and then some of the
Exactly.
anxiety goes away, and you focus on the activity. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, let's get to the next one. I'm curious. Here we go. Trust battery. So you got this from Toby Lutka of Shopify. Here's my first question with this. When you saw this from Toby, whether it was on Twitter or something else, did you immediately envision this picture in your head?
You know what? It often takes me a little bit to get to what will be the final picture. And this one's, it's probably not my finest one, but I think the first thing that I see when I hear of trust batteries. Like battery is such an iconic object and symbol now. And we're all sitting there using devices that it totally makes sense that a battery has like a full and an empty and somewhere in between. And we see these icons all the time. And instead of like reading, I think I read it in an article that somebody pointed me to, a paragraph to see that. All you have to do is go, here's a full battery and here's the battery that's nearly dead, and then you just get it. So in that sense, yes, you're like, oh yeah, this has a really clear visual that's associated with it. But in terms of the rest of it, like should there be a scenario and what should they be
Mhm.
saying? And very often, like I sort of have an idea and then I start doing it and it turns out to be a bit too complicated. And then there's just like, I spent a lot of time as a user experience designer and building products. There's like a phase where you just put it down and it's complicated and it's not right. And then you tweak stuff, you move it around and you trim stuff. And then you're like, oh yeah, now it gets simple. So I always have to go through that flow. But definitely when you hear trust battery, I'm like, oh yeah, kind of know that there's something here that's going to make this simple to people to get across.
What about when you work with people in a business setting? What level of trust do you start with them? Do you assume highest trust and it goes down, or lowest trust and they have to earn it, or middle trust and it could go either way? How do you like to work?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because one of the few things I've definitely learned along the way. One was from an agency we worked with, and they talked about trust as being repeated interactions, like you are consistently delivering on your promises. And I think there's another sketch in the book called about the trust equation. And so you have to just you're continually delivering on what you say you're going to deliver. And so that idea of it builds up over time makes sense. And if I'm a company and I'm trying to earn trust with my customers, we have to do that every time. We have to deliver on what we say. However, with people in my team, like I do think there's a level of like people demonstrate trustworthiness once they are trusted. There's another sketch I really like, which is called the transparency paradox, which is like the more you try and sort of spy on people at work as an organization, the more people like do stuff secretly under the table. And so I
Mm,
think it's a bit of a two-way street. There was when I worked at Jump Associates, we had a coach and we spent a lot of time working in close teams And so they developed a really good library of team tools, like ways of working together, managing conflict and things like that. And one of their ideas, which really stuck with me, was this idea of pure intention. And the idea was the 10 in the tension was like give everybody a 10, like assume best intentions up front, that people are going to try and do their best, and that people are going to strive to do their best. And people, if something goes wrong, they didn't do that deliberately. So in my personal relationships at work, I do tend to start with, I think, a pretty high level. Like you never know until you've started working with people how you're going to get on. And I do think there is some building up over time. But I had worked with somebody else once who's he sort of introduced, he's like, I'm going to start you in the middle. And I didn't always sit right with people. I tend to start near the top. I'm like, this is going to work out. And that's the
Mm.
way I'm going to assume the relationship is going to go.
When I was younger, I used to start at the lower level and
Mm,
look for the person to raise it. But as I get older, I lean more towards the assume positive intent first. Um,
yeah.
and I think it's a more optimistic way of looking at it. So it's something that I've been working on. But that's why this picture drew me. Um,
Interesting. I would say like one of the things that I notice about people that I've really enjoyed my interactions with them, even if it was just a first discussion like this, like we haven't met before, was people who evidently started with me right at the top. They were like,
hmm.
this guy's great. I'm so glad to see you. You know, they've never met me before, but they're so glad to see me beforehand. So I think, yeah, I think that's a much nicer model to be with people, is like assume that this is going to work out great.
I agree. And that's one of the benefits of building in public, right? You either have a newsletter or a podcast. It's so interesting because I listen to a lot of podcasts and I've never met some of these people, but I feel like I know them to a degree. And that inherently builds the trust. So one of the benefits of being a creator, let's call it. Okay, let's go to the next one. And I have a total of six. Most of them are related to some sort of career development or self-development
Yeah.
because that's what our level up community is focused on. Okay, this one, the spectrum policy. I really like this from the perspective of a leader running a meeting where people expect you to give feedback, ask questions. So I thought this was a great reminder. When you see the slide, what's the first sentence that comes to your mind or memory?
Yeah. Do you know what comes to mind? I sort of want to get it. It's behind me somewhere on the bookshelf. So I literally, as I say, I was interested in researching in creativity, and I learned about this method called synectics, which was kind of founded, or there was a group of them by this guy called George Prince. And he wrote this book called The Practice of Creativity. And I was very interested in creativity, both individual creativity, but more and more about teams. Like, how do you, as a multidisciplinary team, like you're a product team, you're trying to make something new. How do you come up with something new that is going to be valuable? And there's a lot of like subtle friction and dynamics in these meetings that goes on. So I did a PhD studying new product development at Berkeley. And so I spent a lot of time reading about this and studying teams. And in this book, he does this interesting thing where he has like essentially transcripts of like an ideation session, you might call it, from a team trying to solve a problem, come up with an idea. And he goes in at such a micro level to like this guy, he said, let's do this. Like, hey, couldn't we use bubbles? And then somebody says they'll just pop, and then he'll stop and he'll say, what just happened here to Howard? Howard proposed using bubbles. How did he feel when the guy said they'll just pop? He was like, okay, no, people don't care about my ideas. I'm not going to contribute for the rest of the meeting. And so it was that kind of like really micro level of how do people feel when they're sharing ideas. And he has like an assumption, like you don't share an idea in a meeting unless you see some good element in it. Like nobody shares stuff. Nobody says an idea because they think it's deliberately bad or it's not going to work. So your task is like it might not be perfect right now. And I think a lot of people, if they come into like ideation or something, it's really easy to go, oh, these people are wasting time with stupid ideas that are never going to work. And I think business sort of teaches you to go like, what's not going to work? What's not going to work?
Mm.
And so I think the task very often is to go, okay, yeah, bubbles is crazy because we can't use bubbles. But what is it about that that has this germ of something good? And we used to do this a lot when I worked at Jump Associates as well. Sometimes you would go, okay, let's just make some ideas to try and move us forward. They're not going to work, but we're gonna put this new concept out there, and then we're going to say, well, what's good about that concept, even if the whole thing's not good. And so that's what as soon as you say, yeah, I know all of this comes back to me when you say, what do I see with this? But it's this dog-eared old book where he's dissecting these conversations, these ideation conversations. And I think honestly, most people don't tend to treat things like a spectrum. You tend to treat an idea as like a whole thing when it comes out. And there's no chance that in an ideation session that you could always do that. And they're very fragile. Our egos are very fragile in these sessions. And so that's why I think this is a good thing worth sharing.
That was a great line. You just shared that our egos are very fragile in these situations because it's so true. Every, at the end of the day, I always remind myself, everything ties back to human psychology. The way you communicate a message, the way you deliver a message, etc. At Amazon, one of the leadership principles is think big. And it
Hmm.
says that thinking small is self-fulfilling. So how do you basically break yourself out of that? And I have to share. So Ethan, he has 70 patents from Amazon. And so people ask him, how do you think big all the time? And this is one of his secret weapons. It's the creative whack pack. And
Yeah,
basically,
I
do you
know
have this one?
it's just over there. Yeah,
Oh
exactly.
yeah,
On my little
yeah.
shelf.
Usually whenever
Yeah.
we talk about thinking big and we bring this up, people buy it immediately on Amazon or somewhere. But yeah, it's just a great way to change your frame of reference. And I will say the best meetings at Amazon were when after a doc review, there was a hotly debated section, and then the prompts from the senior executives on the questioning on, well, you basically going five whys deep, or how do we think about it this way? Or I heard that at Airbnb, a popular question is, how would this change if we add a zero to it? So
Hmm.
10x or 100x, etc., to make you think bigger outside the scope. But I really like this one because for anyone who manages a team out there or takes part in meetings, which is pretty much everyone in the corporate workforce at least, use this idea as a spectrum framework rather than ideas as 0 to 1 or black and white. So I like it a lot. And anything else you want to share about this?
It's interesting. When I was doing my research at Berkeley, I spent a bit of time looking into metaphor. And I know it sounds crazy, but I did a few sketches on metaphor now. But I think ideas is like an idea is such an abstract thing. And so what this is really is a shift in metaphor. And like they're not just black or white. We can actually have a spectrum of these things. And it's so funny that ideas also like we typically talk about ideas as objects. Like, oh, I just got an idea. Like I just literally got this thing. But ideas are funny because people are afraid to share them. But ideas don't actually work like that in the world. Like our metaphors for ideas are wholly imperfect. Like if I give you an idea, you have the idea, but I still have the idea as well. And so I think there's a ton of interesting stuff about how we think about ideas, and just thinking about them in a different way is worth it.
I agree. Okay, let's go to the next one here. The paradox of choice. This one fascinates me because I see, I mean, you could gauge success, business success on all levels of the spectrum here, but I see the most success on the two extremes. Either the super highly curated, let's say, for example, a brand like Ferrari, right? Very limited SKUs. This is what you get because we deem this the best. Or you look at some place like eBay or Amazon, where there's almost infinite choices. And that's also partly what makes their marketplace special, right? How do you think about this with the paradox of choice?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And I guess, it's funny what like that those two extremes is what I tried to put in this sketch, right? Which is you have like Mega Pizza Co on one side, and
Yeah.
then, some restaurants and some in Berkeley in particular, the one I was thinking of is like Cheese Board Pizza. Like they just do one type of pizza each day, and you just know that it's going to be good, and you just say like I'm going to have 5 slices or 2 slices or whatever it is, and there's no decisions to make beyond how hungry you are. But you're absolutely right. Like one of the like the as I understand it, one of the key success factors in Amazon is like selection, right? So
So
yeah.
actually, Emily has a good question in the chat. How do you
Hmm.
minimize the anticipated regret piece? Any thoughts on that?
it's a really good question. So, what I was illustrating here was this is the paradox of choice. Actually, I think the bit that was most interesting to me about it and why I thought that it needed a sketch compared to what people just generally know is this idea of like the self-blame. Like you get to the end of this, and not only did you pick something which might have been great, but you made yourself feel bad along the way.
Mm,
Yeah. And so definitely when you have I had my brother was recently looking for a job and he didn't have offers for ages, and then he got two in one day and he said yes to one, and he immediately is worried about the other one that he missed, right? Whereas of course if he only got one job offer, he'd feel fine. So I the option that I have found works well for me is when you have just like a limited range of choice. Like you have the simple, the medium, and the super, or like the cheap, the medium, and the fancy, and then
mm,
you just like which one of these do I fit in? But I don't know if there's an easy answer to that, Emily, and I'm not necessarily the expert on it. And Barry Schwartz wrote a whole book on it. And I did another one about buyer's remorse, right? It's like, hey, I just bought this thing, and now I feel like I should have bought the other one. It's a real thing. So, I'll think about it, and when I've got better answers, I'll get back to you. I think it's hard.
it is interesting because even for wide marketplaces, the curated feature sets, like, top choice badging or reviews, right? It
Mm,
always, in the end, you have to help the customer narrow down and filter based on various, let's just call it features or ratings. Whereas on the flip side, sometimes you see these super curated companies, let's call it. I always find it interesting when those super curated companies open up some sort of customization feature,
mm.
because customization is the ultimate, you can have anything you want. So I always just feel like both ends of the spectrum are trying to, they always test the other because they're trying to, because that's what their customers want. But it's interesting because, like, there's something for everyone in this visual.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about with paradox
Yeah.
of choice, isn't there? I mean, we were doing some stuff on our house, and we worked on the kitchen. I remember we worked with this kitchen company, and we were like, "Hey, what about all these things?" And they were like, "Nah, that's not going to work. You should do this." And we're like, "What about that?" Nah. And he was probably right, but he needed to like take us along the journey to get there. And so maybe that's what these super curated companies have to do. You have to persuade people. You have to give them the trust that we've done all this thinking for you. So you
Yeah.
don't need to go somewhere else. And maybe that's true. Like, there's a world of music and podcasts you can listen to, but hey, we've picked some out. You can start here. And if you like it, then you don't need to worry about what to choose later because we'll help choose for you. But you have to earn that
Exactly.
trust, perhaps. Yeah.
Which I think is going to be really interesting in this age of AI, as people rely more on the AI recommended choice, because instead of getting a page full of, let's call it, links, you're going to say, this is the answer. It's like, okay, well, how do I trust that this is the answer? So I think this will be more prevalent in the age of AI, which I'm interested to see how it plays out. Okay,
Yeah.
let's go to the next one.
Like getting as much selection as you can on there. And I just worked at, until very recently, a marketplace where we connected schools with substitute teachers. And the interesting thing about those kind of markets, so, maybe the difference is is it a marketplace or not? Because in a marketplace, what really makes it work is matching the supply and demand, but having that selection. Like if you turn up and there's only one choice, and that person's, if you want an Uber and there are two Ubers and they're both booked out, that's rubbish. That's a terrible choice. But if there are, 10,000 and only two of them are booked, then it's terrible for the drivers. And so you have to match this get this balance. And the more
Mm,
so taxis are perhaps a simple example. We were matching teachers and schools and specific roles, and so you have a lot of uh, particular elements that you might need matching. Like we need a physics teacher to teach grade 6 or whatever, right? And so unless you have that, the more selection that you have, then the more like perfect matches you can get. And I think that's when a marketplace works great. Like you have exactly what I'm looking for, not just like more or less what I'm looking for. It's exactly what I'm looking for.
mm.
So it could be the difference between a marketplace and if I'm just selling products. So I think I don't know if you read. Do you ever read Calvin and Hobbes?
Very little.
Okay, I highly recommend Calvin and Hobbes Card. They're quite old. They're quite old now, but yeah, Calvin's dad is like a bit of a Luddite, essentially. Like, and he goes to the supermarket and he basically starts railing against all the different types of peanut butter there are. Like, what am I supposed to do? Quit my job and spend my life dedicated to choosing peanut butter? And the manager has to come and speak with him. And I think that's what people can also get to, and it stresses people out and it makes people
Mm.
feel bad in those situations.
Find your why not. This one's really interesting because I went through this exercise recently on finding your why. And these three circles and then the overlaps are pretty popular. But I like your take on it on finding the why not and asking why not to each opportunity. I actually think that is can be more effective. So tell me, the question here is, what made you want to turn this into a sketch?
Yeah, good question. Good question. So I actually like the model, as it says, is from an amazing lady called Priya Singh, and she came and gave a talk. And that's where I first heard about it. She described it to me. I think what made it interesting to me, first of all, was this sort of clarity and it's slightly like a new model for me. And I've seen various types of these, was just these three buckets of like, okay, yeah, I can do work that like brings in money and allows me to go do other things. And I can do work that like pushes the world forward in some way. And I can do work that really like I get a kick out of, like making music or making art or whatever it is. And I think there's maybe a danger or there's like a vision of like, oh, you can get work that you love that is feeding the planet, that is going to pay you well. And we might have that in mind when we're looking for roles. And that's just really hard and it's not necessarily realistic. And I think it stresses us out. So you might have a job that pays you really well, but you feel like it's the company's not doing as much as it should be, or that you don't get, that satisfaction. But she's saying, like, well, you know what? Not every job has to do everything. You can have a job that fits two of these buckets, and then you can do your work that feeds your soul outside of that. And so I think I wanted to share it because A, I really like the sort of three buckets that she gives. And B, I thought it was a really nice message that we don't have to torture ourselves, that we're not ticking all of the boxes in one thing in our lives.
I love that last part you said because one of the common advices that I don't like is find your passion,
Mm.
right? Or work on your passion or make your passion your job, whatever, because I do see it from a more realistic sense. Obviously, there are situations. I could probably name four people off the top of my head who I know well who have all three. But that's, like you said, it's super rare. And for 99% of the people out there, it's unrealistic. So I think the more logical mental model is to break it up into these three buckets. And I think that's where more people are going, is what I'm seeing, because they're realizing that it is very hard to get all three, as you just said. So I like that. I like this message because it's not all rainbows and unicorns. It's more grounded in reality. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Okay. So I think this was a good message to get out to people. And even the thing here is it also depends on life stage, right? That's probably what drives it a lot. Because I know a lot of people who probably overlap in two of these circles, but they're not ready for the third one because they might have young kids right now. And it's just simply not a priority, right? But later on, maybe 2 decades, they will turn it, they will flip it. So it's almost like, these circles are all the same sizes right now, but they need to be like different shapes and different areas of overlap.
I think it might have been Ryan Holiday who had a related model, and he said exactly that. Like you've got your family and friends and your work, and then perhaps whatever is your passion, and you just can't do them all at once at the same time. Because if you try and do your passion and your work, you will neglect your family and your friends. And if you try and do all your family and friends and work hard at your work, you're not going to have time to, do whatever your passion is. But you might at different times. So you might go like, these years is we've just had some young children. We've got young children. That's going to be my focus. And I'm going to come back to the passion project in a few years' time. So I totally agree. Yeah, like I should extend it. Yeah, as you say, the bucket should be changing throughout time.
I think you could do a V2 on this diagram. I think that would be good for the second book that you put out. Speaking of Ryan Holiday, when I was at Amazon, we did 2 fireside chats together, both
Hmm.
virtual. But one thing he said that I always remembered was he purposely rereads the same book at different milestone stages in his life. So, for example, maybe he read one book, I think it might have been The Grapes of Wrath when he was a teenager, and then after he graduated college, and then when he became a parent. And then because he was in a different stage of life, he absorbed the material different. So instead of reading the latest fad on new books all the time, pinpoint a few classics that really touch you and then reread them in different parts. So it
I
was, it
like
was a
that.
takeaway I've actioned on more of. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. Next one. Okay, this is our last one. Nine Enders. When I read this in the book, I was like, first of all, I was like, that makes so much sense. People do this all the time. And then I was thinking, why? And then my question to you was, first of all, do you do that? Have you seen yourself doing this?
To some degree, yes. Now, I don't know if I've not like mapped out like doing something crazy and whether or not it hit one of these milestones, but I definitely have found myself doing what I think is the core message of this and what drives us to do that is that as we approach the end of a decade, we examine our lives for meaning. And that's just such a natural thing to do. Like I remember, I don't know, I remember as I went from 29 to 30, like 30 seemed like this major milestone. Now it seems like, I was so young at 30 or whatever. But definitely you're like, you get to that point, you're like, I'm going to turn 30. That seems significant. Like it's not significant. Like it's just like the next day. It's just like tomorrow. But it is a prompt to make you go, am I doing what I want in my life? Am I achieving what I want? Do I have a situation that I'm enjoying? Am I staying in touch with my friends? And it's those kind of questions, that self-reflection, which makes people go evidently, because there's research where they found it. You go like, you know what? I always said I was going to run a marathon. We still never done it. I'm going to sign up for one. And so it's not particularly, I think that, people seek crazy experiences because they're 30 or 40 or whatever. It's the fact that you had this prompt to go, is my life what I wanted it to be like? And what do I need to do to get there? And so that 100% I have done. And, like when I turned 40, we saved up some money. I mean, I went away with some good friends and, could have done that at 39, could have done that at 38, could have done that at 37. But we didn't. We did it when we were 40 because we took stock and we're like, this is one of the things that we value in life and we want to do. So let's go do it. So that I definitely have seen.
It's a good prompt. The reason why I like this sketch a lot is because it combines human psychology, and then I'm fascinated with humans' relationships with time
Hmm.
because it goes by so fast. It goes by faster as you age, at least in my perspective. And then it changes when you have a child. Well, I have a 2.5-year-old daughter now.
Hmm.
So I look at time completely different, right? And I was thinking about this, and it relates to almost like a bucket list, sort of. So I'm curious, is there something on your bucket list, or what's at the top of your bucket list?
I did a sketch recently about rivers, not buckets, which is that we stress ourselves out with bucket lists. And sometimes you should let the opportunities, like sometimes it's the right time to do this thing. I'm gonna go do it. And sometimes it's the right time to do other things. It's a bit like we were talking about with the previous one. I mean, you know what? One of them, like I don't have it written down as a list, but one of them was to release a book,
Mm.
and have it in a bookstore like down the street, which happened this year. So that was nice. And I had another one which was about spending more time making music and releasing an album on Spotify. And so I did that. But of course, with any of these things, it seems like, a checkbox, but it's not really like, you do a book, but that's just the start of some new like wider connection that you can have with people. And now you can do other things as well, which is great. If you make some music, it doesn't mean you're done making music. You can keep doing more. So yeah, I like rivers, not buckets, but I think a book was on there. As to what the next thing is, I sign up for a lot of endurance events, and I'm always looking for like what the next interesting challenge is.
Oh,
So I don't
interesting.
know I don't know what that is yet.
What
So
was the hardest endurance event you've done?
I do a thing called swim run. Swim run is like you swim in your sneakers and you run in your wetsuit, and it's like I did this amazing event last year where you start on an island and you run around the island and then you swim to another island and you run around that one and then you swim back and then you swim to the mainland and then you run along. Like it's a really epic day out and they're really long. So those have been the hardest things I've done. They're like marathons, like 8K swim and 30K run or something like that. It's a long day
Oh,
out.
that's fun.
Those have
Wow.
been those have been when I've got to my physically lowest. But there you go.
Okay, I got to check out Swim Run. I was just listening to something where it said to stand out, create your own category, and
Mm.
Swim Run sounds like its own category because I've never swam with shoes on. So that's interesting.
Exactly. It's a new experience. If you look up, there's a brand called Otio, Otillo, which means island to island in Swedish. And that's how it started. Like basically, like, could you start at the bottom of this archipelago and get to the top? However, you can do it just in, human powered. And so
Ah,
they're brilliant adventures in beautiful places.
I love that. Okay, and we're just gonna go through let's call it quick fire questions for you. How do you decide which concepts to visualize? Like, do you just stumble upon something and it hits you? Is it a methodical process? What tell us more?
Yeah, good question. I actually did a workshop recently on like training myself to notice and collecting things. And I think I put like sooner or later everything I know will probably be on there. And so I've always got this like radar that's always on the lookout for like, oh, you know what? People should know this, or that would make a really good sketch. The original things were like basically things that I kept finding myself saying. So I'd be like in a one-to-one as a manager, or I'd be doing a training or something like that. And there was a model or a framework that I just kept coming back to. I'm like, you know what? That should probably be a sketch. So I do that. I have a very long list. I add to the list much faster than I can do the sketches. Sometimes it's things that change the way I think or surprise me. Sometimes it's things that I wondered about. I'm like, what is the equinox anyway? And exactly, how does that work? And maybe I had a vague idea and I had to go look it up. And I'm like, well, if I was wondering it, maybe some other people are wondering it. So let's make that a sketch. So there's a lot of different ways that maybe it gets on there, but like yeah, essentially it's anything I find myself sort of repeating to other people in a way. And when I do that a few times, I'm like, that could probably be a sketch.
I like that. Is there a How long does it usually take you to complete a sketch?
Yeah, it's the publishers asked me this when we were doing the book, and I eventually went with like half a day, but it's often like spread out. And I've realized that my process tends to be sort of multi-threaded. So I might have like 5 or 6 at different stages on the go. And so I've got like an interesting idea that I just wrote down. And I realized that as I'm walking to work, I'm sort of mulling over like how I could explain it potentially in a sketch. And I might do that in 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, I've got a draft of like 3 different ideas about this one, but I'm not quite sure about it. And then other times I've got one where I'm like, I've already got a draft. It seems pretty good. I just need to finish it and do it properly. And so I'll actually have all of these sort of streams going in parallel. But overall, if you add it all up, it's probably, well, maybe it's more than half a day. I spend quite a lot of time researching these days. I found that when I put stuff out online, people tell me if I'm wrong pretty quickly. So I try to be right in the first place, which
The
extends my time.
the internet feedback loop is helpful and can be very candidly critical at times. Um,
Exactly.
is there a particular sketch you found challenging that just comes to your mind immediately?
I think the the one that was, I think, challenging, but also that came out the best after that was probably this one called the curb cut effect. I don't know if you've seen that one. The idea with the curb cut effect is that essentially when you design for people with disabilities, you actually tend to make things better for everybody. And so the curb cut is like when there's a crossing on a road, instead of having between the sidewalk and the road a bump, you put a cut in the curb, right? And you might do that for people who've got a wheelchair. But actually, what you find is that that's actually really helpful for, delivery people and people with bikes and older people and everything like that. And so that was one where I remember somebody suggested it to me, and I don't know, I didn't want to get preachy about it, and I didn't want it to overcomplicated it. But in the end, I found a really simple way of doing it. But it was probably one where I was like mulling it over for quite a long time in my head before I sat down and just did it.
I
But this,
I do
yeah,
remember this visual. It
yeah,
speaks to me because with a parent that has a stroller, when you come across a sidewalk or a road that doesn't have one of these, let's just call it curb cut effects, you just think, why not? That makes no sense, right? And then the other part that I like about this is you take for granted all of the, I don't know what to call it, background or minutia or simple designs that we see in our everyday lives uh, that are impactful. So it makes you step
yeah.
back. Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, this is just a bit of street furniture that I walk by all the time. But actually, it's there for a reason, and it really helps. It's in these circumstances. Yeah.
Yeah. It makes you see the beauty in the everyday simplicity. So I like this one a lot. Okay, yeah. Is there an idea or question that you are eagerly wanting to visualize?
I have so many. So is there one? No. Is there like 100? Yes. I'm
It's
just
the
sort of like,
paradox of choice.
yeah, which is where I fit again a bit with like I really like this idea of rivers, not buckets. Like I think I thought about smart defaults a lot when I was working designing interfaces for a company that helped people save and invest towards their futures because you make a small change and it makes a big difference. Definitely deserves a sketch. It's been on my list for years, but sometimes I read or hear something where I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly what to do with that sketch right now. I'm going to do that one instead. And so some of them just sit on the list forever. And it doesn't mean that they're not worth doing or that I shouldn't do them. So gradually, like, I guess if I keep coming across, they go back up to the front. But like, yeah, smart defaults should definitely have a sketch. What else? I've just got I've got like a million habit stacking, forgetting curve. The map is not the territory. Like hundreds of these things need a sketch to help people get it, but I just haven't got to them yet.
Okay, interesting. This question, how did you decide the cover of the book? Why this sketch?
Hmm. Yeah, good question. That was a challenging thing. And like designing a product, there's a lot of different things that a cover has to do. And the publishers obviously have quite a strong opinion on that. And I think very often, like an author doesn't even necessarily get a say in the cover. The publishers just choose it. We were trying to get. We tried a few different things, and one of the other things was like that we're taking lots of ideas and we're distilling them. We're creating these easy to understand things, or we're gonna like take all these ideas and we're going to piece together the world out of it, or we're going to take a big idea and then we're going to communicate it in a simple way. And that was kind of where this came from. When I remember we started looking at things like, like uh, there's this apocryphal scene, no doubt, of Isaac Newton with the apple falling on his head, and he's got gravity, or there's Archimedes jumping in the bath, and he's like, thought about displacement. And so we're trying to take like, here's a situation in the world which makes you question this bigger principle. And I don't know, at some point I was like, waves are fascinating. I love waves. I love The Wave by Hokusai. And I've actually done some sketches on the things about waves. Maybe I can combine these two, like to show that you're trying to like understand this phenomena outside.
Mm.
So yeah, it was a somewhat painful process, but I'm actually quite happy where it came out.
Oh yeah, I love it. I'm a fan because this is the famous visual that most people have seen, and then this is the oh man, I'm actually riding the wave, and this is the thought bubble kind of almost physics of it. So I thought it was a good one. I guess besides that photo, do you have a favorite one?
Favorite sketch? I really like the overview effect one. And I don't know if you remember that one from the
Let me
book.
see.
It's one of those ones where it's just super simple, but I think it just does the job. And so the overview effect is kind of like when you have this sense of like, okay, this is yeah, this is all we've got.
Oh,
This right here, like you're not stuck in the details. You just get this big picture perspective, and you sort of time you get it like sitting at the top of a mountain and seeing the world in front of you. But the biggest time of that is for the overview effect was, being on the moon and that classic picture of like looking back at Earthrise from the moon and going,
mm.
everything that we do and exist is on this little blue and green ball in the blackness of space. And actually, I did the sketch originally, but for the book, I added the two astronauts.
Ah,
One of them's like sat down, just contemplating, having a little moment, taking it all in. So I think maybe that one's my favorite. I like it. To me, it communicates the idea of the overview effect really clearly. And it also has a little human element, and it also looks quite nice. I have a print on my wall over there.
I do like this one. Do you have a desire to go to space? Maybe do one of those Blue Origin space flights?
You know what? Like, if somebody offered to me and there were no downsides, yeah, I would go to space. Yeah, yeah. You're like, this is just a bit of street furniture that I walk by all the time. But actually, it's there for a reason, and it really helps. It's in these circumstances, yeah, for sure. But
When you're
is it?
59, when you're 59, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm 59 and I examine my life for meaning. I'd be like, I've not been in space. No, I would definitely go if the opportunity was there. But like, I think there's so much that I'd like to do down here as well that it's not the main thing on my bucket list for sure.
Okay. How about this one was a pre-submitted audience question. Is there a sketch that you're working on right now that you are very interested in? Or I guess here's another question because we kind of dabbled into this one. What's the next one you're going to put out?
So the next one I planned to put out, but as I say, sometimes it doesn't work that way. Was this one where I think I read about called the Three Bricklayers Parable?
Hmm,
I don't know if you've heard of that.
no.
So I have another one which is like the blind and the elephant, which I think is also kind of a nice one, which is blind people touching different parts of an elephant and going, "Oh, it's a snake. Oh no, it's a rope. Oh no, it's a wall." And like we only see a part of it. And I quite like the idea of, a parable is something which makes you think, but it's also like makes it really concrete. And the parable of the three bricklayers is apparently it's around Christopher Wren and rebuilding like building St. Paul's Cathedral, but it's like comes across three bricklayers doing their work and he's asked them about what is he doing. One of them says, I'm laying bricks so that I can feed my family, get paid. And the other one's like, hey, I'm building a wall for this building. And then the other person is like, there's a glint in his eye and says, I'm building a cathedral. And the different levels of sort of meaning that we might ascribe to our work and how that affects things. So that was the next one that was on my list. But whether that works out as the next one that will come out, we'll see.
Ah, interesting. The blind and the elephant. I was gonna bring that one up because it might be my favorite one or the top three. And
Mm.
I thought I was gonna see it in the book. So here's the question. How do you decide which ones made it to the book?
It was really hard. It was really hard. Just for context, there are just under like 900 sketches, and some of them are very old. And actually, a lot of the ones that made it in the book were quite ones I covered quite a long time ago. So I actually redid about like over 100 of the
Oh
sketches
wow.
from older versions to make them smarter and newer and to fit the style of all the other ones. The book, we did try and get like a balance. Like one of the things I do definitely believe is that, we're not all one dimensional. And I love that we've talked about like work related ones in this podcast, right? And this interview because they've meant a lot to me and they changed how I've done stuff at work. But also I think that, we're all like whole people and yes, we have our jobs, but also we go camping and we look at the stars and you want something, to talk about with your kid or like there's all these different aspects of life. So we wanted to get ones that covered different parts. So we have like more concrete ones. There's like about a quarter of the sketches are physical stuff about the planet
Mm.
and the stars, and then there's ones which are about our culture. There's ones that are about well-being, and then there are sort of more abstract ones as well. And so that was kind of how we did it. But I could argue forever. The publisher had some suggestions. I'm not always a very good judge of what people will find interesting, I've learned. So when I do one I think is brilliant, sometimes I get crickets back, and other times it's the other way around. So in some ways I left it to the team to go like, what do you guys find interesting? Let's use that as a starting point. And then I lobbied for some of my favorites to get in, but so many didn't. So it's
It
already quite a thick book, and yeah, I missed out so many.
It is it's this the same thing with happens with Ethan and I when we do our writing, the newsletter or on LinkedIn, etc. What we think will be huge hits, sometimes crickets, and sometimes we just put something out and it just hits like wildfire. A fun idea, I'm a sucker for museums and I love art. It would I would love to see a Sketchplanations museum come to life, where it's let's just call it your original pieces or artist prints of your, I don't know, top 10 in each category, or maybe the different years in your life. I don't know, something like that. Just a fun idea.
Do you know what? That would be fun. It is something I've thought about before. I'm going to show you really quickly behind here. One sec. I have my own
Mm,
little wall here where I have them all up. I say all up, I've got like 25 or something, and
wow.
there's 900. But I think it would be quite interesting if you literally covered up a whole wall of this. Yeah, maybe that should I should add that to my list.
Oh yeah,
It's one of
I
the things to do.
definitely agree. Even, for my daughter, I'm probably gonna print out a few of these and just tape it around our house because it'll probably spark an idea in her.
Love
But
it.
yeah, I like it, I just love the simplicity. You are taking very complex ideas and making them very simple. Okay, so I've shared the Sketchplanation website, the book on Amazon, and then your LinkedIn profile if people want to connect. Is there anything else or any other method that people can follow you on all your works?
The main and probably best way is like there's a newsletter. So if you go to the site, there's a way that you can sign up, and then you'll get the things every week, and you can always just hit reply. And I'm on that. Absolutely. Also, you can just message me on LinkedIn. One thing I would say is that about a year ago, a friend of mine had an idea that he was worked in radio and that he loved radio. And he was like, why don't we do a podcast about Sketchplanations? And I was like, that's madness because it's all about the visuals. But actually, I found that it's been actually really interesting and really fun too, because yes, it's about the visuals, but it's also about the ideas, and it's been quite fun to like dig into that. So that's another thing you could look up. There's a podcast where we go a little bit more in depth to each of the ideas and talk about some examples and what it means.
Ah, I like that. Check out the podcast on the newsletter website, the behind the scenes of the visual. Okay, Jono, before we end this, is there any last call to action, or let's call it career advice you might have for our viewers and readers?
Did you say career advice?
Yeah, yeah. Let's narrow it down to career advice.
What I would probably go with is I didn't expect. I started this as a thing for myself, like as a little challenge, like how can I get better at explaining stuff? And I did a drawing a day for a year, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do explain something a day for a year and see if I get better at it, just for me. And I started posting stuff, and people started following and finding it interesting. And here I am, 10 years later, still doing this thing. And so my advice and my learning really is that you never really know what will happen when you share stuff. And in some sense, like it's fine and it's interesting to do stuff yourself and keep it in your own notebooks, but you never know what magic can happen if you're willing to like put stuff out there and start publishing it. Like the world and the internet's a big place. And just the act of sharing stuff, the feedback that you get when you put stuff in public, you with your name on it, you work harder on it, you make it better, and you follow where it goes. And you never know where it's going to go at the beginning. So that maybe that I think my advice is like if you're doing something that's fun and interesting, don't feel like you should just keep it to yourself necessarily. You can start sharing it, and you never know where things will go. And that's happened to me multiple times in my life.
I love that. That's a great way to end it because we get a lot of questions from members about should I start this? How do I start this? And I think the simple answer is just start sharing it and you'll get your answer.
I have one of the sketches just there is another one of my favorite. So many I like, but it's called the Doorstep Mile. Do you know that?
Let's
So
see.
the Doorstep Mile is this, I think it's in like a Scandinavian idea that actually just sometimes getting out of the house can be the hardest bit. Like you want to go running, mile 3 to 4 is easy in comparison to mile 0 to 1, right? Like you actually have to put your stuff on and start. And Seth Godin has this advice like start small, start now. And I think that's a good one. You never, I look back at my old sketches and they're, in some ways they're just rubbish, but they got me here. So there you
I
are.
love that. It reminded me, you have one in the book where it's about the best part of the finish line is it gets you over the starting line, something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that one. That was a good one.
Yeah, yeah, the real like the real point of the finish line is it gets you over the start line and it's not
Yeah,
about the finish line, but it got you started in the first place. So if you think you want to do a book, brilliant. It doesn't matter whether or not it happens, but it got you started and that's the bit that really matters.
love it. All right, for everyone out there, try to find out what your finish line goal is, but use it to just get started. All right, thank you, Jono. I really appreciate it. It was a fun chat.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks for everybody. I really appreciate it.
All right, see ya.
Bye.